Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a global geopolitical live update. We're going to be talking a lot about Europe. We're going to be talking a great deal about Hungary. We're also going to talk a little bit about Iran and whatever we have time for. I'm a little bit late to this because I was just having a video call with Benny Pie, who helps out with the channel an awful lot. And of course, we know that JR helps out, and he helped automate my mapping that sits within another program that, you know, he's created these models to automate it so I don't have to put all these individual pins. It really sped up my map making, although I don't do it enough these days just because I'm so busy doing other things. Benny Pie has now taken JR's automation and automated that so that I literally get this kind of new map set up and I press a button and it automates the entire mapping, taking the data from these two other mappers to synthesize it in my map. And then it's just, so that's going to be a real change, a real game changer. So I'll be doing more mapping updates if that is the case, because it's just super quick. I can even do it live. I can literally open a map, speak to you guys, press a button, and it can update the maps like that. Anyway, so that's cool. That's why I'm a little bit late. Yeah, talking to him about all the things going on in YouTube world. Also, I want to take this opportunity to show you this. That Car for Ukraine ATP Geopolitics Doris patch is there. Look at her. Look at her, the disaster girl. Looking at the camera, smiling at the Kremlin burning as the rockets fly off. Oh, well done to JR and to Benny Pie again, and to Chris from Clockwork Designs, who put that together. And so I've just been sent that by Ivan from Car for Ukraine. We are fundraising at the moment for, who are we fundraising for? Richard Woodruff from Frontline Kit. And after we complete that one, I think we're going to do a Car for Ukraine again, so we'll resurrect the Doris patch. So that is awesome. I absolutely love that patch. Now time for my super. You probably think that I'm Jonathan Pearce, but actually I am. Ta-da! I'm actually not Jonathan Pearce. I'm Jonathan MS Pearce. So that is a glasses change for your benefit. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this patch and take my patch work quilt, my patch display, and I'm going to attach Doris there next to the Christmas tree 2026 one. And there she is. So well done, Doris. Good lass. And a nice postcard, Car for Ukraine postcard from the legends that are Car for Ukraine. Awesome source. Right, let's get on with news. Now that these are credibility glasses, or some might say computer glasses. I'm not sure. Let's get on and talk about everything that's going on in the world. So it's going to be something of a busy one, because the world is a busy place. I was wondering whether to start with Iran or start with Europe, and I am going to start with Europe. I've just decided off the cuff there. I'm going to start with Europe because quite a lot has been going on inside Europe. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for all the live chatters who are chatting in a lively fashion. Thanks to the mods. Thanks to the members. Thanks to these subscribers. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. It really does make a difference. We crawl along in our subscriptions because I have a feeling the cosmos or YouTube hates me, one of the two. And one way of overcoming YouTube's hate for me is for you guys to subscribe if you haven't done so already. For those of you who have, you know I hold you close to my heart. It's true. It's just true. Right. There we go. Let's get on to what's been going on in Europe. Well, what has been going on in Europe? There have been some elections. Just coincidentally, a whole bunch of elections in different places. There's a presidential election in Slovenia. We've had some provincial or city mayoral elections in France, and we've had some Rhineland-Palatinate elections in Germany. AFD, so we'll start with the bad news, is the AFD, in my opinion, bad news. The AFD, the German right-wing populists, have over doubled their vote share. And that is leading people to celebrate this. So if we look at here, obviously, AfD is celebrating. Far-right AfD celebrates a record showing in Western German state vote. The far-right Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland, achieved its best ever result in the state election in Rhineland-Palatinate, reaching 20% of the vote, more than double its previous result in 2021. Despite its electoral success, though, the AfD is unlikely to be part of the next coalition government in the state, as both the Christian Democratic Union and the Social Democrats have refused to cooperate with the party in a policy known as the firewall. AfD leaders Tino Kruppala and Alice Weidel acknowledge that their party is now the largest opposition party in the Bundestag and in the Rhineland-Palatinate, but they are prepared to continue their work from the opposition. Okay, so bad news that they have done well. They are anti-Ukraine, they are anti-EU, they are far-right populists, and they are the people that the Trump administration want to win, right? So you've had endorsements of the AfD from JD Vance, from Elon Musk, from people associated with or inside the Trump administration. Here's Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who is a lunatic. She is pro-Putin. She's had a gift from Kirill Dmitriev, a Putin book. She's been wining and dining with Russians and so on and so forth. So she's well in the Russian ecosystem. As Anton Shekhovtsov says, the MAGAverse is celebrating the strong performance of its German far-right allies in the election in the western state of Rhineland-Palatinate. Here is why, and he talks about why that is the case. Congratulations to our friends at the AfD. It is wonderful to see the people of Germany waking up to the fake news. We are happy to have you as allies of this administration. So it's very clear that the Trump administration, although she's not a formal spokesperson for the Trump administration, they are very happy with the rise of the populist right in Europe. Essentially, honestly, if the Nazi Party were to rise to prominence in Europe, if we went back to 1939, the MAGAverse would be clapping that on. That's how I see it. Now, let's go sideways a little bit to Slovenia, where we have a good result there. The Slovenia ruling Svoboda of Prime Minister Robert Golob is set to narrowly win today's parliamentary election. This despite meddling from Israeli spy firm Black Cube, who were hired to engineer victory for the right wing opposition SDS. So you've had Slovenia, that must be prime ministerial elections, not I said presidential earlier. So that is good news that's pro-Ukraine, pro-EU leader there winning, albeit narrowly. That is good news from Slovenia. And then we have the French elections. Marine Le Pen's national rally, Rassemblement National, fell short of its bid to take control of a host of major French cities in Sunday's municipal elections. And although I haven't been keeping a massively close eye on this because the whole world is burning and it's difficult as a single human to do so, it does seem like the centre and the left have held, and to some degree the centre right have held off the onslaught of the populist right in France. So the major cities where there were votes in the French local elections. So you've got these different colours here. The Socialist parties are left, Renaissance or diverse right. So Renaissance is Emmanuel Macron's party, is it not? Renew, Renaissance. They are, so Macron is a centrist, he's actually centre-right and a diverse right. The Ecologists, obviously on the left there, the Green Party, and then the UDR, which is a National Rally ally, but it's not National Rally. So the mayoralties, Bordeaux, centre-right, Lille, left, Lyon, Greens, left, Marseille, Greens and Socialists, Montpellier, Socialists, Nantes, Socialists, Nice, which is the hotbed of the far right in France, as far as I remember. Nice has gone to the UDR. Paris, Socialist, Strasbourg, Greens and Toulouse. I was at university. No, I wasn't at university. I was at university in Leeds, but I went and taught in Toulouse for a year as an assistant d'anglais at the Lycée Jolimont. And the college there in Toulouse. So I have an affinity with Toulouse. That looks like they are centre right there. So good showing in these elections to sort of repudiate that French far right movement. Which is good news. So, for example, breaking exit polls in Paris suggest Socialist Emmanuel Grégoire could trounce Rachida Dati tonight, former minister, with 53% of the polls. Blah 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 blah. Marseille re-elects its socialist mayor, defeating Le Pen's far right there. So anyway, all pretty good news if you don't want Rassemblement National, because they are a threat to Ukraine, a threat to Europe. Some on the far left aren't particularly fans in France of supporting Ukraine either, so you have to be careful. I mean, I would advocate for the centrists in France. I don't know where the Greens stand. The Greens in Germany are very pro-Ukraine, and they're this very mature, I think, political party in Germany. I don't know what the ecologistes are like in France. Some of you may be interested to hear that National Rally did not win the municipal election in Toulon. And Toulon, that's important because that's the naval city. That's a very big maritime city that could well have gone to the right there. A city which is home to the main French naval base and is the largest in the Mediterranean and Western Europe. But they did not win in Toulon, which is really good. Yes, so that's happened in France. And indeed, we have had here Sophie Pedet saying these were mayoral elections, so any national extrapolation is, of course, hazardous. It's going to be quite particular to each city, right? But if you go by voting in towns with more than 100,000 population, one cautious conclusion is this: the broad non-populist centre can hold. So when I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens in the presidential elections in France next year, because Emmanuel Macron, I think he's term limited, so I don't think he can run again. And it's been thought that would have been Marine Le Pen's chance for presidency, but she's been invalidated from running because she has been done for embezzling EU funds, which I think says a lot itself. But anyway, we have what looks like so Rassemblement National and its allies there having two towns there. So one of those is going to be Nice, I presume, and you've got Marseille has a couple of districts there with the right. But generally speaking, you've got a good coverage of all the other parties there, which is good news. France Insoumise is the left that might not be so pro Ukraine, whereas I think the socialists are fine. But correct me if I'm wrong on that. And the communists have a mayoral election down there, so I don't know where. I presume they're not going to be too pro Ukraine. Okay, so that's what's going on in France. If you're French in the live chat, please put your opinions about what's happened over the last 24 hours. As Dr. Drug, or the Drug, extremes are never ever the solution. Nowhere have extremist parties provided long-term prosperity and liberty. I think there's something in that. So ATP Geopolitics comes from a tippling philosopher, and we have a group locally where we call ourselves the tippling philosophers, and we go down a pub, and we used to do it formally. We've got families now and it's a lot more difficult to find a time, but we used to once a month go and meet down a pub, and we'd pick a subject like Taoism or some aspect of religion here, or some aspect of we're talking about morality or happiness or whatever. We'd pick a subject, someone would lead it, and we would just sit around drinking pints, and we'd have our initial thoughts. Then the person leading it would go into the subject in more depth, and then we'd have the to and fro, and then we'd all see whether we change our minds or whatever, and we'd discuss particular items. But one of my mates, Andy, was always like he's always in the middle, and he always advocated for not this or not that. I think it'll be somewhere in the middle, and time and time again you think you can't always go just slap bang in the middle, but there certainly is something to be said about moderation being a safer option. And this is actually the principle of coalition governments, right? And proportional representation is that it's much harder. So say, for example, the MAGA has taken the GOP to the right, to the extreme, and you in the United States, you're just going to get swinging all over the shop. So as it polarizes, you're going to go from Democrats to Republicans to Democrats to Republicans, and it swing like this. Whereas in Europe, you've got a much greater chance, I've talked about this a number of times, of coalition governments, which means that already you're having to compromise your position because you're in coalition with other parties. And then that I think tempers the extremes. So coalition governments are less likely to be extreme. There are some exceptions, of course. I think the Czech government at the moment, I think as well, the coalition in Slovakia too. But if you go say Fidesz in Hungary, that is not a coalition government. You know, it's a much more of a two-party system there. Really, it's between the new Tisza and Fidesz. So I would like to see the UK embrace some kind of proportional representation. I think that would be healthier for our democracy and more representative, even though it comes with its own sort of challenges. I think on balance, though, proportional representation is far superior. And it does, as I say, temper those extremes, which is, I think, very, very important. Anyway, thanks for that view. Right, okay, moving on. We are going to go talking about extremes. And in the UK, obviously, reform is on the agenda all the time. I'm not really going to talk much about them, but they are, I think their true colours are just coming out. So there are 15 of Reform's Scottish candidates. So we're going to have May local elections in the UK, and it's expected that Reform are going to absolutely paste everyone across Britain in terms of local council elections. The problem is no one's really paying, if that happens, no one's been paying attention, because the council, there were some limited council elections last year, and in fact Reform took control of a bunch of councils and they've completely failed in pretty much every single one of those councils. They don't know how to run councils. They tried to copy everything from the United States, taking on Doge, and it's like, hang on, we're cash strapped, we've been as efficient as we can, no one's wasting money in these councils. And they found out that you can't go and make swinging cuts, and we don't have DEI and all this stuff in the UK that they think is there because they've been listening too much to Trump and sitting on Twitter too much. And what happens is you vote for someone, you vote for Reform because you really hate immigration or something like that, and local councillors have nothing to do with immigration, really. And so you're voting on a national thing that these people have no power over, but that's what they're campaigning on, and they don't have any expertise in governance generally. And this is what happened in these last May elections last year, is you voted in all these local councillors, then a bunch of them resigned because for XYZ, so a bunch of them were sacked, a bunch of them moved parties, a bunch of them, it was all highly controversial, and really very few of them were any good at actually running councils and sorting out potholes and adult and children's services. And so you've now got all these candidates, and Nigel Farage has already been under a lot of pressure for not vetting candidates previously. So he keeps saying, we've got a much more robust vetting process. But the problem is with Reform is essentially, if you are a crazy, batshit, bonkers and racist person, if you're looking at all the parties to join to try and get into power, you're going to join Reform, right? So they attract all these nut jobs, right, as well as maybe some sensible ones and whatnot, but they also do attract an awful lot of nut jobs, and he's supposed to be vetting them, but they're clearly not vetting them. So another 15 of the Reform candidates in Scotland have been exposed as members of a racist conspiracy group. Another one was if you're going to vet someone, look at this guy. Okay, let's check. He's registered on Companies House. Okay, check him out. Oh, it looks like he's just been done for fraud. Okay, right. Probably not the candidate, right? If I can do that as an individual, just Google that person and find out whether he's been convicted for fraud. Like, you should do that in your vetting process. So one of the Scottish candidates has just been, defrocked already, because he's been done for fraud and all sorts. Yeah. Anyway. Now, just sticking on. Now, I'm trying to join these ideas together of Rassemblement National, the rise of the populist right in Europe, but also the support it's receiving. And this is where we're going to Orban, right? There is a through line going on here. The amount of support that European far right groups are getting from the United States, for example, is significant. We've seen that support in terms of endorsements for AfD candidates, endorsements for Viktor Orban and Fidesz from Trump and others. We are now hearing that from a Guardian article that the populist far right sort of right-wing media political complex is being funded by billionaires from outside the country, oligarchs, and all sorts of ne'er-do-wells to the tune of £170 million in 5 years. Now, we don't have a political process like the United States, which is full of money. Ostensibly, we have very small campaign budgets in the UK due to regulation and whatnot, which is, I think, a good thing. I think the Citizens United scenario in the US, where there's just money galore, I think is not good for democracy, and you pay your way to victory, arguably in the US. But anyway, in the UK, there's a lot of money now coming in to reform, and it's coming from outside the nation, and that is deeply concerning. So there's this tendency for right-wing populist parties in Europe as a whole to get an awful lot of influence from Russia, from the United States, from the Trump magasphere and the magaverse, and people like Steve Bannon, who have been trying to coordinate all these things, and so on and so forth. And I think is deeply, deeply concerning. Here we've got Representative Don Bacon from Nebraska, who is now stepping down, but he's very strong supporter of Ukraine. Here, I think this is worth taking on board what he says.
Well, I appreciate that he's negotiating. We need that. But I don't think it helps to act like a referee in a boxing match, as if you got two equal people boxing. Now we have a victim.
So what he's talking about is Donald Trump moderating the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. But the idea that he is a mediator, an objective moderator, that the United States is now neutral, this is something that Don Bacon has a problem with, and so do I.
Equal people boxing. Now we have a victim, we have a democracy, a country being invaded, we have a dictator that is doing the invasion, murdering POWs. They've kidnapped roughly 20,000 children. They're murdering POWs on the field. They're bombing cities every night. We should not act like we're neutral in this fight. This is a fight against good versus evil. And I expect more from a Republican administration to stand up to a bully, stand up to Putin. I consider myself a Reagan Republican. I believe firmly that Ronald Reagan would have known which side to stand on and be more clear about. I support negotiations, but there's a right and wrong here, and we act like there isn't. We act morally blind, and it's sending just a terrible message out there. So again, I support the Iranian operations, Maduro, but when it comes to Europe, the message is one of weakness, it's one of appeasement, and it's hurting our country. I yield.
Interesting point there. As a Reagan Republican, he supports the Maduro campaign. He supports the Iran campaign, actually. But what he doesn't support is what's going on with the United States with regard to Europe, and how the US is kind of not taking sides in what is very clearly an obvious moral calculation to make. And again, I think that fits in with the Trump administration aligning itself with the populist right. And I think Russia is much more of the populist right than, say, Ukraine. And I think this is part of a larger ideology that is, I think, at play in the American administration. Here is Paul Begler to Trump here this is on Bill Maher.
Show some guts with Putin for once in your life. He attacks everybody.
Show some guts to Putin for once in your life.
Show some guts with Putin for once in your life. He attacks everybody. He attacks his own vice president, Mike Pence. He attacks the Pope. He attacked Oprah. But he never attacks Putin. And this is something I really do want. I'm sorry to be so hawkish, but he needs to, for once, show some spine with our greatest enemy, which is Vladimir Putin.
He needs to show some spine with our greatest enemy, Vladimir Putin. Absolutely 100% there. And that is not what we are seeing in the Trump administration. Now, let's go to Hungary. So we've got a big section on Hungary. Hungary's foreign minister has been found to be, or has been accused of leaking news and information straight from briefings and meetings in the EU. This is Peter Shihata, the foreign minister, straight to Sergei Lavrov and the Kremlin. And he does it in live time, apparently. So Hungarian foreign minister has been briefing Russia on EU meetings, according to the Washington Post. Hungary's foreign minister is clearly in sync with the Kremlin's top diplomat. There's no doubt about it. And just look how many times he's been to Moscow and how many times he's been to Kyiv. History won't forget that, traitors. He has spent an awful lot of time in Moscow, goes there very frequently, meets up with Lavrov, but also, the idea that he is leaking details of meeting. According to the newspaper, the Hungarian foreign minister called Moscow directly during the EU meetings and relayed details of the discussions to Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov. Sources say the communication allowed Russia to stay informed about the internal discussions of the European Union. Shihata himself has not commented on the situation. However, he has visited Moscow several times since 2022 and met with the Russian leadership. I think there needs to be punishments for Hungary over this, but they can't step in and do that because, of course, that would be seen to be interfering with the elections that are due to take place imminently, right? Now, by the way, to that, Radoslav Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister here, says this would explain a lot, Peter. And he's often having these run-ins, Sikorski, with Peter Shihata and Orban. I love Radoslav Sikorski and how supportive of Ukraine he is now. How sensible he is, essentially. Anton Gerasienko then points out that Donald Tusk has also tweeted the news that Orban's people inform Moscow about EU Council meetings in every detail shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. We've had our suspicions about that for a long time. That's one reason why I take the floor only when strictly necessary and say just as much as necessary. So what you have here is Donald Tusk saying, look, I actually already self-censor in these meetings because I know full well where this information is going. So the EU cuts Hungary out of sensitive talks over leaking to Russia fears, according to diplomats. Hungarian foreign minister was accused of passing information from closed-door talks to Moscow, and now there could be some ramifications there. The EU is limiting the flow of confidential material to Hungary, and leaders are meeting in smaller groups, as Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk warned of long-standing suspicions Viktor Orban's government is sharing information with Russia. The news that Orban's people inform Moscow about EU Council meetings in every detail shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, said Tusk, as we have heard. So, yeah. Now, talking about the Hungarian election, considering the amount of effort that Russia is going to shift the polls, considering they have sent over people to help with the electioneering, with everything that's going on. In fact, as I pointed out to you before, Putin's former interpreter is involved in Hungary's election process, Daria Boyorskaya, who worked as Putin's English interpreter and was sanctioned by Poland, is organizing OSCE's election observation mission in Budapest. So you've got a Russian organizing the election oversight for the OSCE in Hungary, and the person who's doing that is just part of the Kremlin inner circle. Absolutely unbelievable. But they've sent a number of people over there to essentially get involved in the election, and you would expect the polls to be tightening, but actually the latest poll has Tisha up another 20-point difference here from the Median poll. Orban keeps losing more and more support. People are leaving the ship, says this source. And that Median is I think that's your top dollar polling there in Hungary. So that is very good news. Of course, the problem is going to be whether they cheat or not. Now, the other day, Orban went to the EU and there was he got hounded by an awful lot of other leaders who do not like what he's doing with Ukraine. Friedrich Merz here saying what happened in the council today is unacceptable. So this is Orban vetoing the 90 billion euros still. This is from the other day. Is unacceptable, and an end will be put to this in the future. So they are definitely going to be looking at adopting this different voting scenario. But of course, like I've said to you before, if that requires a unanimous vote to put that into motion, then they might have trouble because Hungary aren't going to vote for that. Probably Robert Fico isn't going to vote for that, so on and so forth. But it should be a qualified majority. Now, Orban, as a 6-year-old child, EU is divided over the approach to him. Politico reports that European leaders are split into 2 groups to convince the Hungarian Prime Minister to approve a loan for Ukraine. Most of them, including the President of the European Council, have chosen to increase pressure on Orban. At the same time, some EU leaders have tried to take the opposite approach. Among them is the Prime Ministers of Italy and Belgium, who have tried to touch Orban's ego by expressing sympathy and understanding for his position. Quote, we need to treat him like a 6-year-old child. We need to meet him. We need to go to meet him. And that is kind of a bit like Trump, really. That's the situation with Trump. Now, you know, there were plenty of people who gave him a heck of a hard time and have done over time in the European Parliament.
What a speech, Mr. Orban. What a speech. You say you want democracy, and you brag about your majorities in the Hungarian parliament. Yet since years, you only rule by emergency decree. Are you so afraid of democracy, Mr. Orban? You say you are for national sovereignty, yet you invite Chinese policemen to surveil the people in your country. You say you want to stop migration, yet you let Russian spies into our Schengen system and call it national card. That is what you're doing. Mr. Orban, you are not a patriot. You are just a useful idiot of Russia and China. That's the reality.
Now, I'm not sure that this was the other day, though, because I'm fairly sure I've shown you that before, but maybe it was, as we have a number of similar sorts of attacks on it. Anyway, there was an opportunity for a number of people to get up and absolutely harangue Viktor Orban in Parliament. Finnish MEP Aura Sala calls for urgent EU action to bypass Hungary's vetoes and secure support for Ukraine. She urges limiting Hungary's influence, expanding majority voting, and even preparing a mechanism to remove countries that repeatedly violate EU values, says Pekka Kalianiemi from Vatnik Suit. So I think that's absolutely right. So anyway, many in Europe who are pro the EU are not fans of Viktor Orban. Someone who is a fan of Viktor Orban is, as I've played this to you before, Donald Trump, unfortunately.
Gathering in the magnificent city of Budapest. It's a great place and a great...
So he's talking about a gathering of CPAC. So you've got the Conservative Political Action Conference there, or whatever that stands for, CPAC. It's the... Well... It's where you see Tucker Carlson hang out an awful lot traditionally, and CPAC has been to Hungary a number of times, to Budapest. There's this connection between CPAC, the Heritage Foundation, Hungary, the United States, the Trump administration. They are all, I think, very deeply connected. I wrote a feature article on this a couple of years ago, connecting the money from Russia and Hungary to the Heritage Foundation through CPAC, and with Tucker Carlson. His father's on the board of directors for the firm that lobbies for Viktor Orban. These are all connected scenarios. You connect all the dots and you see that the Trump administration is connected to Viktor Orban in much more tangible ways than just, oh, I like this guy as a strong man. Trump is always saying he's the best, strongest, most awesome leader in Europe and that everyone loves him and all this. Trump is, I think, inextricably linked to Viktor Orban in very many ways. And he's taken the Orban playbook that took 10, 15 years for Orban to get where he is today in terms of power and stripping away democracy and checks and balances. Trump has done that in 15 months. So anyway, back to Trump.
Great country. I also want to send my best wishes to Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who I am endorsing, as you know. I am endorsing his election, which is coming up pretty soon. He has my complete and total endorsement, as a matter of fact. The Prime Minister has been a strong leader who's shown the entire world what's possible when you defend your borders, your culture, your heritage, your sovereignty, and your values. He's a fantastic guy, and it's such an honor to endorse him. I endorsed him last time he won, and he did a fantastic job for his country, especially at the borders with all of the crime and all of the problems that other countries have. You don't have that problem. You had very, very powerful, very strong borders, and he's responsible for it. So I hope he wins, and I hope he wins big. And despite all of the attacks, you have to understand he keeps on winning, something that we all share in common. We want to win, but we want to win fairly, evenly, but decisively. To everyone at CPAC Hungary, thank you for your commitment to common sense and conservative principles and to the common civilization that Americans, Hungarians, and Europeans share. Our two countries are showing the way toward a revitalized West that will protect our citizens, uplift our children, and lead the world for generations to come.
So he's reading from an auto cue here, but you can hear the ideology. This is very similar to the national security strategy that was released recently, whereby the US administration see the security of the United States in terms of what they see is to their benefit that a populist right leads and rules in the EU that will invariably tear down the EU, and that they become individual countries driven by nationalistic fervor. And of course, that kind of nationalism means that they don't want to be in a federalized Europe. So AFD, Rassemblement National, reform, that's exactly what they want, which is to the benefit of the United States as Trump sees it, because then he can, or the United States can take advantage of all those countries individually because they can't work as a collective, as an alliance, as a political alliance or organization that the EU is, that gives that collective strength. The sum is greater than the parts. If you just take the parts on individually, you can win. Trump sees that's what he sees the calculation as, and so he is advocating here for these really strong conservative values, for this vision of a Europe whereby you're all populist, you're all run by populist right-wing political parties and movements.
We're going to be working hard together on energy, and you're going to be working and continuing to work very hard on immigration, because Europe,
which is ridiculous. He said we're going to work hard on energy, which means he's literally paying $1 billion now at the moment, isn't it, Trump, to stop wind farms being built. Like, these wind farms have been given permission, they're being built, blah, 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 because he's so ideologically weird, Trump. He's now going to pay them not to work. Right, he's going to pay $1 billion to scrap that which is already being put in place. Then he's just going to sell LNG to Europe as much as he can. So you guys, you want to buy energy off us. You don't want renewables, because of course, if Europe was to become energy independent, i.e., rely a lot more on nuclear and renewables, then they would have no need for the United States to provide them with LNG across the ocean. And so there is a method to his madness there. But he's like, you guys work out your immigration issues, we'll work out energy, and eventually, hey, you guys can just be vassal states of the United States. I won't say it in those terms, but that's a reality.
Europe has got to sort of get going a little bit. They're having a lot of problems, and they got to get going, and we're with them all the way, but they have to work very hard to get it back. God bless you all, and have a great conference.
Idiot. So those are his opinions there. A campaign visit from Marco Rubio to Viktor Orban, a video address in support by Trump. So Rubio went there the other week. An impending campaign visit by J.D. Vance, an entire company of Kremlin political strategists sent to Budapest to guide the election campaign for Orban. I mean, so you are seeing Russia send people to Budapest to interfere with the electoral process, and you're seeing Americans being sent to Budapest to interfere with the electoral process. It's absolutely incredible that Viktor Orban would be propped up by both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are peas from the same pod. It is that obvious to me. It's Ukraine that does the election interference, isn't it? By responding to Orban's idiotic propaganda, insults, and threats. As Trump says, I hope he wins, and I hope he wins big. Now, but it's not just Putin and Trump. And this, honestly, fascinating. You've got another kind of right-wing zealot in the form of Benjamin Netanyahu, who has Trump in his pocket. Well, surprise, surprise, he also endorses Viktor Orban, saying, I want to thank my friend Viktor Orban. He's been like a rock. Today, we live in turbulent times. You need leaders who can protect against this rising tide and can also ensure safety and stability for their own countries. This is what Viktor Orban has in abundance. I know many world leaders, and I can tell you he's right there at the top. Viktor Orban means stability, safety, security. And of course, if you look at the data, Viktor Orban means corruption, lack of economic prosperity in Hungary, a corruption right throughout the system, and a lack of freedom, right? That's really what Viktor Orban offers and has brought to Hungary. And you can see that through empirical data. But as far as Netanyahu is concerned, Orban means stability, safety, and security. And that's really singing off the same song sheet as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. It's really quite depressing. And at CPAC, I haven't got it, I meant to have that here, but one of the speakers at CPAC, if I remember rightly, is Benjamin Netanyahu's son. So they're all there. You've got a whole lot of them just trying to prop up Viktor Orban. It's honestly like, if you are someone who is a Republican in the United States who, loves the Republican Party, or maybe of old, but you're still holding on to it now, you've got to see who the Republican Party, qua the Trump administration, and all of it, that the facilitators of the Trump administration, you've got to see who they're getting into bed with. First of all, they're getting into bed with Putin. Second of all, with Viktor Orban. Now, if you look at what's going on in Europe, Viktor Orban is not the good guy of Europe. He is just not. And if you support Ukraine, Viktor Orban is your enemy. So if you've got Donald Trump publicly endorsing Viktor Orban, that's the same as Donald Trump publicly endorsing Vladimir Putin. There's no functional difference in my book. And if you're still someone that supports Donald Trump and supports Ukraine, you're just wrong. You're just incoherent. You cannot hold those two positions. You cannot hold support for Ukraine and support for Trump in any meaningful, substantive manner. Now, it's not just Netanyahu. It's not just Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. It is also Nawrocki, who is the president of Poland. Today, a dark day in Polish history, says Jay in Kiev, as Poland's president Nawrocki will arrive in Budapest to campaign for the Russian-backed kleptocrat Viktor Orban. Wow. So Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland, says Nawrocki will be in Budapest on Monday to support Viktor Orban in the election campaign, the same man who is blocking the 20th package of sanctions against Russia and the return of 2 billion zloty for equipment the Polish army transferred to Ukraine, in a campaign in which Orban is threatening an alleged invasion of Ukraine supported by the special GRU team in the company of Putin's shills like Matteo Salvini and Marine Le Pen. Mr. President, please investigate why Orban's nationalism and thievery have caused Hungary to become the poorest country in the European Union. Is that what you wish for Poland? Why are you endorsing these people who have clearly taken Hungary in the wrong direction? And it seems to have got to kind of Georgian states of affairs in Hungary, as Peter Magyar, the opposition leader here, says that he was attacked by Tutushki. So yesterday, when I arrived in Nagykandzsa, 4 to 5 men attacked me. This is the opposition leader, the guy 20 points ahead in the polls, being attacked as I was getting out of the car. One of them tried to hit me from behind, which my colleagues prevented. The action was clearly organized. A few hours earlier, at Mark Radnai's forum, they were making threats with a knife that had a 20 to 30 centimeter blade. There, the police took the attacker away in handcuffs. We have to call the police almost every day for our deputy chair, Agnes Forstoffer's counter shifts, because of the aggressive provocations. Reports of provocations are coming in from other constituencies too. Viktor Orban and his crew clearly aim to turn the election campaign into a brawl. The goal of these attacks is to provoke a scandal out of the peaceful and cheerful Tisza community. I respectfully ask all our candidates, volunteers and supporters not to fall for this Russian-style troublemaking and provocation. That's exactly what Orban's people want, a fight, so they can parade a potential Tisza voter around in their propaganda for weeks. I know it's often hard because of the regime's baseness, but I still ask you to show Hungary's peaceful, cheerful and humane face. Let's laugh right in the face of power. 20 days. Let's keep letting Viktor Orban and his lot squirm. P.S. Many suggest it, but I still won't wear a bulletproof vest or request police protection, and I'll keep being out among the people. Thanks to my colleagues for fending off the attack. Goodness me, I hope that doesn't prompt someone to go and take advantage of the fact he doesn't have a bulletproof vest. So that's happening in Hungary at the moment, where you got the opposition leader getting attacked. And then, as if you still weren't concerned with Donald Trump's desire to appease these strongmen dictatorial leaders, Lukashenko is looking like he's going to go to the White House to visit Trump, the dictator from Belarus. And remember, the Americans have just relieved sanctions on Belarusian bank and potash exporting entity. Self-proclaimed Belarusian President Lukashenko has released a group of political prisoners after meeting with the US delegation in Minsk amid agreements to ease sanctions. So the US eases sanctions on Belarus. The USA lifting sanctions on Belarusian companies and banks, according to Special Envoy John Cole. Sanctions will be lifted on Belinvest Bank and Development Bank, the Belarusian Finance Ministry, as well as potash companies, Belaruskali and Belarusian Potash Company. So multiple entities there. It's important to note that Russia has used Belarus banks for large-scale money laundering schemes. Russian companies would transfer billions of dollars through Belarus banks under the pretense of paying for non-existent goods or services. This was made possible because there are no customs declarations within the Union state of Russia and Belarus. Undoubtedly, these schemes will resume now. Russia will get an additional opportunity to increase its money flow and direct it onto financing the war. So yet again, the Trump administration are giving a gift to the Kremlin. Just giving a gift to the Kremlin. Melania Trump's asked Lukashenko to talk to Putin about Ukrainian kids lost in Russia, but Lukashenko said most likely they've fled the war. It's not as simple as giving kids to Zelensky. If he had cared about kids, he would have ended this war a long time ago. So the victim blaming the war on Zelensky there. Robert Fico, the Slovakian leader, said that the country may take further steps against Ukraine due to the suspension of Russian oil supplies. So just one kick in the teeth after another when it comes to these nations, most of whom are supported by the Trump administration. It's really deeply depressing. Right, before we go on to the next little nugget, just a few bits and pieces to catch up on. Ignis of the Flame says, with the midterms coming up, is the global shift toward authoritarianism accelerating, or are democratic institutions proving more resilient than expected? Can these institutions hold out long enough for a change of direction? Well, it's an absolutely fabulous question, Ignis. And the American institutions are not holding, although the law courts are to some degree. That really, in the US, the last bastion, the last bulwark against authoritarianism are the courts. And the courts just about are holding. But certainly all the norms and mores and traditions of governance have been thrown out the window. I think you have a Trump administration that is willing to just tear up institutions, mechanisms, and norms, and it is deeply concerning. So that's a problem. What you're seeing, I think, is a continued polarization of global politics, whereby the rise of the right, like the UK, for example, the Labour Party are in power now. They traditionally centre left, but in order to try and deal with reform and the rise of the authoritarian right, they've push themselves more to the center, and in fact on some policies even to the right of center. And what that has meant is the Green Party in the UK has had to pick up the baton from where the Labour Party used to be. So the Labour Party are now, I would say, are a centrist party. I don't think they're particularly left wing in a number of areas. At least the Greens are now representing the populist left, and so you are seeing, arguably, could be the death going forward over the next 3 years till next general election, after subsequent local council elections, probably the death of the centre, the death of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and the rise of Reform and the Greens. And I wonder how much that is happening in Europe, with the centre actually struggling. And you can understand why from a psychological point of view, because trying to advocate for, say, status quo or sensible politics that's a bit like, well, we're not going to change this much, we're going to keep centrism is, it doesn't grip you like tearing everything up and starting again. So progressives on the left will be like, this all sucks, you're all complete oligarch bastards, which I would agree with, and then it's right, let's rip it all up and start again from a progressive point of view. Whereas the populist right will say, my god, you're all elitist political political elites, we need to rip this all up and start again from a populist right point of view. But then they actually just end up having their strings pulled by the oligarchs, as we can see from both MAGA. MAGA said, we'll drain the swamp. We're going to drain the swamp. We're going to, rip up all the mores and norms. Yeah, they did that. Okay, but then you've just employed the swamp that you said that you were going to drain. And actually, you are just a swamp now of oligarchs. Rather than being political elites, you're just billionaire elites. And actually, that's what's happening with reform. So the money that's coming in to support reform from abroad is money from people like, was it Oliver Hartshorn? No, what's his name? Harborn. Is it Christopher Harborn? The billionaire crypto guy who's now living in Thailand, who's giving reform gajillions of pounds. And yeah, so I think you've just got this move towards these two populist extremes, and that's to the exclusion of probably quite a sensible centre ground, which is where politics probably needs to exist, really, where you've got sensible people who are experts in their areas, and that's why they're probably a little bit more tempered and not so, yeah, let's all start again. Whoa, we're going to rip everything down, burn it all down, start again. It's progress. Or let's rip it all up, burn it down, so we can go back to 1950. Yeah, that's regress. So for me, the populist right is regress. Populist left is progress. As in, I'm not saying there is progress, but that's how I think these guys think that they're going to morally progress the country into a new future. These guys on the right, generally, I mean, that's the hallmark of conservatism, if you're going to link it to conservatism, which is to conserve what used to be. It's the old idea of, I don't like these immigrants. It's not how it used to be. I like, this country how it was in the 1950s. So that's what we're going to rip it all up and go back to that point. And it's probably a little bit more sensible to go somewhere in the middle. Thank you for that, Ignis. Just a couple more before we go on. Lag Monster, subs suffering because you're aggressively endeavoring to achieve the most appalling sound quality possible. I do still love the content and community, though. Thank you, Lag Monster. I did have a bit of a blip the other day, but I thought, it's... hopefully the sound's okay today. I mean, tell me if it's not. I apologize. By the way, there has been some interference from, the old mobile phone interference on the mic. That's been happening a bit recently because apparently Benny Pie's done some research here. My local mobile phone mast is broken. And so it's gone back to 2G or something like that. So it's gone to the old mobile. And that's why there's now, just for the last week or so, there's been interference. Hopefully they're going to fix that mobile phone mast, but I'll try and keep my phone away from the desk to stop that from happening. Hi, JP, says Badger for Peace. Thanks again for all your work. In your opinion, what would be a just peace for Ukraine? Well, a just peace is a peace that won't happen, unfortunately. Or if it does happen, it'll take decades to happen. It's where reparations come from. So it depends whether you mean like a realistic just peace or an ideal just peace. An ideal just peace is the Russians get the hell out of Ukraine, including Crimea and the Donbass, get the hell out of Ukraine, pay reparations, and the international community comes down really heavily on Russia in punishment for doing, that's literally justice. That's what a just peace would be. And they need to be punished in a way that they can't do that sort of thing again. Will it happen? No, it won't happen. So I then assume there are going to have to be compromises whereby there'll be de facto rulership of certain areas of Ukraine. Will that include Crimea? Will that include parts of the Donbass? Probably. It depends what the Ukrainians are willing to give up to get peace, with a hope that they can then diplomatically bring about the reconciliation of those areas, whereby maybe Putin goes eventually and 10 years down the line, you've got political reforms in Russia and they say, yeah, sorry about that, you can have Crimea back under new leadership or something like that. Is that a just peace? Well, if that eventually happens, the problem is, will that happen? So you can start going through the early motions of that, whereby you come to the peace negotiations, you say, right, you can have de facto control of it, or not that you can have, that you do have de facto control of some of these areas. We'll come to some negotiations, we'll have this back, we'll have that back, Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, we're talking about whatever. As long as the Ukrainian people are happy with that, then I won't argue with that. They should be the ones, as long as they are the ones that dictate. So I guess you could be the best answer to this is probably the vaguest answer. So a just peace, it still won't necessarily be just though. I think the best peace we can expect is one that the Ukrainian people agree to. And as long as they agree to that, that's your self-determination. The question is, what will they agree to? How far do their compromises go when it doesn't look like there are any? So a just peace would have to entail Russia making compromises. But the problem is the United States is not interested, as we heard earlier from Don Bacon, is like they are not interested in taking a moral position. They are only interested in being objective or neutral, so that effectively they're not really objective. Being objective like that just means that Russia's far more likely to be able to achieve their aims. So yeah, there you go. But thank you guys, really appreciate that. Okay, I'll come back to some of your questions a little bit later. Let's get back to the news. So we were with Robert Fitzo. Now we're going to go to Denmark. This was something, I don't know if you all heard about this, but a remarkable bit of reporting. Denmark was reportedly preparing for full-scale war with the United States over Greenland in January, with military support from France, Germany, and the Nordic nations. Elite troops and F-35 jets with live ammunition were sent, and runways were to be blown up to prevent an invasion. Wow, they actually kind of prepared for an American invasion of Denmark. The Danish broadcaster DR reports that officials in Denmark, France, and Germany say that Donald Trump's threats to seize Greenland were taken so seriously that wide-ranging preparations were made to forcibly resist the US invasion of the Danish island. The Danish and French governments worked together to create a Northern European coalition to defend Greenland from the United States. Under the cover of a pre-planned defense exercise, Greenland's defenses were bolstered to raise the costs of a US invasion attempt. This included sending blood to treat wounded soldiers, sending elite Danish troops and French Alpine troops to Greenland, preparing Greenland's runways for demolition to prevent a hostile-style seizure, and sending armed F-35 jets to patrol the skies. The trigger for this, according to DR, was the American attack on Venezuela on the 3rd of January, which President Nicolas Maduro, in which he was abducted and taken to the US. According to the source, when Trump saying he wants to take over Greenland and then what happened in Venezuela, we had to take all scenarios seriously. The US attack on Venezuela also convinced the governments that the official US is not functioning as usual, which had to be taken into account in their threat assessments. Trump doesn't have the same level of people around him as before who would talk him out of it. It's super dangerous, says the source. As well as Alpine troops, France also sent a warship and refueling aircraft, pledged hundreds of more soldiers, and expressed willingness to send anything else the Danes needed. Sweden, Norway, and the UK also sent military support to Greenland. As a source puts it, the French said, "Would you like more soldiers? You could have them. Would you like more naval support? You could have that. Would you like more air support? You could have that too." Sources that say that the goal of having soldiers on land in Greenland with as many different flags on their shoulders as possible was so that the Americans would be forced to take a major hostile action if Donald Trump actually wanted to occupy Greenland militarily. Denmark chose to capitulate to the Nazi invasion in 1940, but has vowed not to repeat that experience. Danish soldiers are under standing orders to resist with force any foreign incursions on the territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, and that includes Greenland. So just to finish up, the deployments made it clear that any attempt to seize Greenland would have consequences of the utmost seriousness, including shattering NATO, destroying the relationship between Europe and the US, and causing significant loss of life to the US forces. Just imagine the fact that we're actually talking about this in 2026. It just seems incredible. Although this persuaded Trump to back down and Greenland has since faded from the headlines, the Danish government assesses that the US still poses a continuing threat to the island, according to a high-ranking source quoted by the DR. This is not over. Trump is here for 3 more years, and no matter what happens, the distrust and challenge to the Danish Commonwealth will persist as long as he has set out to go down in history by expanding the territory of the United States. Just wow. Now, going to the other side of Europe, continental Europe, we are going to Greenland. I suppose Greenland is technically in Europe. Probably not. We're going to go to Transnistria anyway, which is the annexed region to the east of Moldova. The Moldovan government has presented a document in Brussels on the gradual reintegration of the Transnistrian region. The plan, developed in February, defines the main stages and principles of restoring the country's unity exclusively by peaceful means. Of course, they are having huge issues with the economy, underwritten by not having energy because the energy's been turned off from Russia, and they're refusing to take it from Moldova or the EU. So Transnistria is in quite the pickle. The key prerequisites for the successful return of the left bank to Chisinau, how do you pronounce that, guys? Chisinau. It's not. It's Chisinau pronunciation. Chisinau. There you go, Chisinau. The control of the full demilitarization and democratization of the region. Of course, there's 1,500 Russian troops still hanging out there and an awful lot of armament. What else have we got? Whilst Trump has been declaring that he's solved all these wars and then started a war in Iran and is helping out Russia and has started a war in Venezuela, etc., and threatened Canada and Greenland, whilst all that's been going on, actually, there have been these flare-ups with all these wars that Trump claims that he's solved. So Pakistan and Afghanistan are going at it, but you've had a flare-up with Cambodia and Thailand again. You've had issues, I think, in some of the African areas too. Anyway, Tulsi Gabbard has said the intelligence community assesses that Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and Pakistan have been researching and developing an array of novel, advanced, or traditional missile delivery systems with nuclear and conventional payloads that put our homeland within range. Now, you're starting to see Tulsi Gabbard wake up and smell the coffee, because she's previously been a fan of Russia, Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and not particularly critical of many of these nations that would otherwise be the enemies of the United States. But now she's starting to, and maybe it's the fact that you can't deny reality for that long. Now with, I guess, maybe you had Kash Patel the other day admit that the Russians have been hacking Signal. All of the evidence that comes out that Russia and other nations on that hit list are doing things that are confrontational and negative for the US. The more that happens, the more permission the US has to get annoyed with them and push back against them. And then you get back to the old understanding of how the world works, which is that, hey, Russia are the bad guys, and they still are the bad guys. And Tulsi Gabbard might not have realized that at the beginning of the Trump 2.0 regime, but hopefully, if she has any element of being able to understand data and truth, then surely she can see that Russia are the bad guys. And here Russia is sharing satellite imagery and drone technology with Iran, so that's still hanging about as an issue. Like the more that this stuff is out in the open, the less these guys are able to deny that Russia are working against the interests of the United States. And the more that happens, obviously, like this, then the more hopeful we can be that the US might actually do something to support Ukraine, who are working against Russia, and Russia are clearly working against the United States. Anyway, you get the point. Now, right, here is just a short, this is from Tulsi Gabbard the other day in that hearing, just one on, is this Angus King, one on the intelligence sharing, I think.
Update us on the intelligence on Russian intelligence sharing with Iran in the current conflict. What do we know?
Senator, if there is that sharing going on, that would be an answer that would be appropriate for a closed session.
Well, it's been in the public press. This is open source that it's occurring. Is it occurring?
Again, if it is occurring, that would be an answer appropriate for a closed session. What I can tell you is that according to the Department of War, any support that Iran may be receiving is not inhibiting their operational effects.
Okay, that's sort of the first cousin of a yes, I guess.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I can't answer that. Even though everyone's talking about it openly in newspaper reports, I can't answer that. We can talk about it in a closed door hearing. We should be able to, like, are they giving intelligence to? I mean, if I ask you about China giving intelligence to XYZ, I'm sure you'd say yes or no quite easily. Why is it so controversial for Republican administration officials to admit that Russia are not the good guys with regard to the United States? It's so frustrating. You know, just admit it and then get on and do something about it. But of course, everyone exists in this weird reality in the Trump administration where Vladimir Putin appears to be the good guy. Just blows my mind. Anyway, there you go. That's that. So we're going to now go on to got a few UK stuff, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go on to, we're going to leave out the UK stuff this time round. Just India is to use the euro alongside the dollar to trade internationally, reducing reliance on the USA. This is another example of Europe and the rest of the world trying to move away from the United States and reliance on the US. In this domain, it's about the dollar being the currency. Remember, it gives that what is it, exorbitant privilege or whatever the phrase is to the United States for having people using the dollar as the international currency of exchange and reserve currency. And what that means is that the US can just borrow loads of money and they can use it, the dollar effectively to underwrite much greater economic success. So the US want to hold on to the dollar being used as a major currency. BRICS have traditionally, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and all these other nations have been wanting to create a multipolar world where there's not a reliance on the dollar. So they want, you know, other currencies to be used. And now we have the EU getting involved because the euro is actually a really pretty stable currency. And here, India and the EU are going to be using the currency to do a lot of trade. Part of the EU-India trade deal, Europe is expanding the role of the euro worldwide and building mutually beneficial partnerships across the globe. That's going to annoy the Americans and hurt the Americans to some degree economically there. So that's a pretty significant outcome. Right, okay. Just a few more things before we go on to the Iran section to finish up the video. Let's go on to riddle me this. What if Orban loses and refuses to leave? Boots on the ground. So the problem with the EU is that they don't have a mechanism to kick a nation out. What they can do is bribe them with withholding funding and maybe voting rights and things like that. But there isn't. Is it Article 7, Article 11, which is one where they can basically pull some rights away from Hungary. But beyond that, I don't know that there's no one envisaged such a thing happening, that there would be democratic backsliding within the EU. So I think there does need to be a lot of thought now about what happens when nations like Hungary take a turn for the worse. But yeah, boots on the ground, I don't know where those boots would come from. But yeah, if there was outright cheating, I mean, I guess you could just probably sanction Hungary, or you could hurt them economically, and I'm sure that they could bring in some. I don't know. Am I sure that they could bring in regulation that would lead to Hungary being pushed out of the EU? Surely they would need some kind of unanimous vote on that, where Hungary would be a necessary part. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Who's Poppin says, I think the Hungarian elections will be bigger than we think. Oh, 100%. Huge. Honestly, they're a big thing. Reform if Labour could slag off Trump. I'm not sure what that means, but I would like to see, what I would like to see is more European nations. And like I've said to you many times before, the problem for the UK is we're out of the EU, so we don't have that security blanket. So Pedro Sanchez can stand up to the United States and gets the support of the EU, whereas if we, or if Keir Starmer stood up to Trump, then Trump can punish us unilaterally. He can't punish Spain unilaterally because they're part of the trade bloc. So any attack on Spain is a kind of an attack on all of the EU. whereas any attack on the UK is an attack on the UK. So Keir Starmer can't stand up to Trump as easily as like European leaders can. But what I'd like to see is a unity between all of these kind of middle powers around the world: Canada, Japan, Australia, Europe, South Korea. You know, it would be great to see people stand up. I don't see Takaichi in Japan standing up to Trump, but it'd be nice to see people stand up to Trump in terms of, you know, where Trump is taking the world. Okay. We have Billy Box saying Hungarians got some balls. I give them that. Yeah, who's popping? Farage's gas keep getting bigger and more frequent. His gas remind me of Prince Philip. Yeah, but the problem is, so here's an example. Who's popping? My dad's got dementia, right? So he's not the sharpest cookie around, right? And he fell over the other day, and they knocked their TV off. He knocked their TV off the stand and broke the TV, so they had to get a new TV. So he's not too good on his feet. So I went around and sorted their TV out yesterday, and because these days, whenever you buy a new bit of kit like that, I do worry about the older generations of the world, because you can't. My parents would never have been able to set up that TV without me there, because you got to like log on to Google, do this, do that, use QR codes, and blah. My parents haven't got Scooby-Doo, so they haven't got a clue. So anyway, I went around, sorted out a TV, and then we're going through, and I was teaching my parents for the 58th time, because I've told them this before, but my dad started using it like while I was there. I was like, yes. So on the Virgin controller, if you've got Virgin TV, and it's the same with the Sky controller, you can of course speak to the controller. You can say BBC One, BBC Two, you know, BBC News, Sky News, whatever, and it changes the channel. I was teaching that, and he started using that, and he says, oh yeah, because BBC One's 601, BBC News is 601, then you've got Sky News, then you got the other one, GB News. I was like, oh dad, don't watch GB News. He's like, what's wrong with that? And even though my dad is that aligned, so actually he's probably aligned to GB News these days. I mean, he's like lives in the world of the Daily Express and Daily Mail. And this is going somewhere, and it's linked to everything we're talking about earlier. So there's a reason I'm telling you this anecdote. I had to explain to both my parents that GB News is a news entity that is part owned by an MP, Nigel Farage. So Nigel Farage part owns. He's got shares in GB News. It is his mouthpiece. It is a propaganda channel for reform, in the same way that RT is a propaganda channel for Vladimir Putin. There's no difference. I had to tell this to my parents, but my parents didn't have a clue about this, so they just thought GB News was just a news channel. And I wonder how many people in the UK really don't know how propagandistic GB News is, and they get sucked into that, and you're sucked into that world of populist. I think essentially propaganda, and this is how these ecosystems work. Is you get a license for a channel like that, then no one really watches it at the beginning. Everyone's slagging it off for not being a success, but it just gradually grows. Then they get their reporter in the White House, like Beverly Turner. She's in there, and Trump's saying, yeah, this is a great journalist. She's great. And then you get this platform. Then it's about social media presence. So GB News is big on YouTube and Twitter and all these places where people are starting to share, especially if you live in the MAGA sphere. You start sharing some of the GB News stuff, slagging off Keir Starmer and saying how wonderful Trump is. You start sharing that in your American ecosystem, and GB News gets a sense of credibility and name recognition. And then someone like my parents come along, who are you know political as much as anyone, but don't live in the same spaces as you and I do, and don't necessarily know what GB News is and where it came from. Suddenly they just think this is a bona fide news channel, and a load of young people might think the same, who aren't really genned up on politics. You get sucked into that without realizing that it's an outright propaganda channel, and I think that's a challenge. And then you see it just gather, and then it becomes a successful news entity. And yeah, anyway, there you go. That's a little sidebar for you on my dad knocking over a TV. Right, a few more little snippets from you guys. Nigel Farage has been to America more times than he's been to Clacton. In fact, he then released some photos because someone is saying he hasn't done any surgeries in Clacton at all. So surgeries are what we call what MPs do. They sit down in their office and they have people come into them, like you're a doctor and you got someone coming into you saying their problem. MPs have surgeries where people come in and say, the potholes outside my house are bad. What are you going to do to fix them? And then you talk to them, you allay their fears and you tell them what you're going to do. He hasn't held one of those. You generally, is it once a month or whatever? He's not held a single one. In Clacton. He doesn't go to Clacton because he's not interested in being an MP. He's interested in being on a TV and slagging off the leadership while complaining and whinging the whole time and having a grievance narrative. But really, it's about just loving the camera and having the attention on him. So he's the Donald Trump of the UK. But he's not interested in actually running things, particularly running things competently. So he's never been to Clacton. And then he released some photos the other day to try and claim that he had, but then someone was like, those are the same photos that you posted like months back here, or last time you were accused of not going to Clacton. So he's just absolutely full of crap. Okay. Now, I did a video on this this morning, so we'll just recover the ground very quickly. What do we have? Trump threatened to bomb the crap out of Iran to obliterate the Iranian power stations, power plants, starting with the biggest one first. So already you know that this isn't going to be a military bit of targeting because he's just going to start with the biggest power station. So this is actually a war crime. And I think you got a lot of pushback because then people are saying this is a war crime. As Edward Hunter Christie says, Trump is threatening to commit war crimes against Iran in that he threatens to destroy the country's power plants. War crimes aren't limited to directly killing civilians or prisoners of war. Destroying a power plant is generally a war crime unless it's directly relevant to the war effort. As Trump's threat is generic, it's basically an open threat of a war crime. Just like Russia criminally targets Ukraine's electricity system, it seems Trump would go down that path too, with predictably terrible consequences for Iranian civilians. Normatively, if this plays out, experts may consider the case for an international arrest warrant against Mr. Trump, as well as international sanctions against him and the relevant co-conspirators. More importantly, innocent Iranians are now in more serious danger through no fault of their own. Addendum to post 1, targeting is more accurate when directly killing, targeting being deliberate and selective, which is the crucial point, more accurate than. Anyway, that's what he then threatened. Then the Iranians threatened to hit desalination and energy plants in the region. So I think you had a combination of people in the United States and really all around the world shouting at Trump saying, you can't do this, it's a war crime. And there's a lot of pushback there and politically in the United States. And then other nations around the region going to Trump and saying, you can't do this to Iran because then they'll screw us and we'll be super unhappy with you. And by the way, we invest a hell of a lot of money in the United States because we're rich Gulf states. Going to allow James O'Brien to read you the tweet.
In-depth, detailed and constructive conversations, which, spelled W, are we sure this is real? Are we 157%? Because, you know, you've got to be really, which, spelled W-I-T-C-H.
Because he missed out the beginning here, which he says, I am pleased to report. So instead of saying I am pleased, so spelling mistakes and grammatical mistakes, you know, saying that he's... they've had these very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. So Trump is claiming that they've been in conversation and the conversation has been so good that he's now going to not bomb their power plants.
Which will continue throughout the week. I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So he will pack up, go home, and hope that nobody ever mentions it again, while simultaneously claiming a glorious victory. Wow. That was 6 minutes ago. So, as I said to you at 10 o'clock this morning, in 6 minutes' time, he could release something that pursues the polar opposite position to the one that's outlined here. But in a normal universe, you would welcome that, particularly given the massively increased understanding of the issues that we have as a consequence of the callers to this program today. In a normal universe, you would welcome that. But this is Donald Trump's world now. We're not in Kansas now, Toto. And therefore, you can only say that's good until it isn't. That looks good until he does something else. That looks good until he does a reverse ferret and makes an announcement that pursues the entirely different position.
Now, talking about the entirely different position, I just want to, where have I got it here? Let's bring that forward. Right, this just shows you the incoherence of Donald Trump. So this is a day in Trump's life. This is Friday. It would take an entire conference of psychiatrists to diagnose whatever mental illness Trump has, says John O'Connell. Okay, Friday's press gaggle, barely exaggerated. At 12:03 p.m., President Trump told reporters he wanted a ceasefire with Iran. 12:05, he declared victory. 12:07, he announced he was sending Marines. 12:08, he said no boots on the ground. 12:11, he said he did not want a ceasefire. 12:16, he declared victory again. 12:17, he asked for a ceasefire. 12:23, he told NATO they were cowards. 12:29, he said Iran was begging for a ceasefire. 12:31, he said everything was perfect. 12:36, he said $500 oil was a good thing. At 12:37, he demanded Iran open Hormuz. At 12:39, he said Hormuz was never closed. At 12:41, he said the US was not at war with Iran. At 12:42, he declared victory in Iran. When you lay that out in that manner, I'm telling you, it is nuts. The man is nuts. I'm so glad someone picked that apart and laid it out. By the way, thanks, Benny Pie, who said, this is JP's article. So all my old articles, because both the websites I used to write for, one kicked all the liberal atheist writers off its platform. We were cancelled. There's an interfaith dialogue called Patheos Network, the interfaith dialogue network. All the atheist writers there, we were kicked off because we were too political or whatever. Anyway, so we were cancelled. Then I started writing for Only Sky, and then Only Sky ran out of funding. In the kind of online publishing crash that happened basically a couple of years ago, and now all my articles are on my website, but unfortunately all those thousands of comments on the articles have disappeared forever. But my articles are there, and as Benny Pies pointed out, there's a link there to the to that feature article I wrote, which was a big old, no, it wasn't a feature anyway, it was a big old article, so well worth having a read there. Anyway, back to where I was. Thanks, Benny Pie, for that. Okay, oops, no, I didn't mean to do that. Right, back to where we were. Okay, so then we have Maria Bartiromo saying, from Fox News, saying, I just spoke with, so what happened is Trump then said, because we had these wonderful conversations with Iran, we're now no longer going to bomb the power plants for 5 days. And then Iran said, you haven't been talking to us either directly or indirectly. Like, that hasn't happened. And then Trump claimed that they had, and he's told Maria Bartiromo that well, I quote, I just spoke with President Trump and he told me that Iran wants to make a deal badly. He said the most recent talks happened last night with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and their counterparts, with Iranian TV saying no talks have happened. The president said it's hard to get information there because the US is blowing up so much of their infrastructure. So there's a claim from the Americans that they are talking to the Iranians, and that in fact they're talking with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. I am inclined to actually believe Trump here. I probably think the Iranians are talking to the Trump administration, but I also think that Trump wanted any excuse for an off-ramp after that really heavy rhetoric about him bombing the crap out of them. But yeah, that's just my complete speculation there. Now, and this isn't for the first time. This is Adam Cochran saying, All right, I'm just going to point this out. Just have a look at some data here to do with the markets. 5 minutes before Trump's announcement that he wasn't going to bomb them, $1.5 billion notional worth of S&P 500 futures were bought up in a single clip. 192 million notional oil futures sold. More than 4 times to 6 times any other trade size during the market close. Insiders profited from his lies in broad daylight. And this has happened right throughout the Trump presidency. You see, just before any major decision or announcement on Truth Social, there is a major buy or sell or bit of trade on the markets that makes someone an absolute ton of money. I think history will show this is the most corrupt presidency in human conception. This will be, I think. It is happening so routinely. Now, I also want to point out what Donald Trump said here. Now, with the death of Iran, the greatest, so he's saying that we need a ceasefire. We don't need a ceasefire. They're defeated. We need the Straits of Hormuz open. No, we don't. We need it. No, we don't. Yeah, he's all over the shop. So are they defeated or are they not? Do you need help in defeating them or are they defeated? Have you obliterated them or not? Okay, here he says that they are defeated. So now with the death of Iran, the greatest enemy America has is Russia, China, Iran still? How about Hamas? How about ISIS? How about, oh no, it's the radical left, the highly incompetent Democrat Party. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I just want to warn everyone in the world about this. As Adam Kinzinger says, so now Democrats are more of an enemy than Russia or China. The evil that permeates Trump's soul grows and grows. Every Christian leader that does not speak up is complicit. And Adam Kinzinger says that as a Christian. Now, I find this horrific that you will victimize 50% of the country to the point where you are claiming that they are an enemy of the state. You are saying 50% of the country are an enemy of the state. And he's done this before. He did this in a campaign. He's done this previously. But I think this is absolutely egregious. There is no justification for this kind of rhetoric. It is insanely divisive. I do have a big problem with that. Right. Just to say very quickly, thank you very much to Zeb Carter for your support of the channel. 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships, super kind of you. Thank you, my friend. Okay, we move on though. Iran has got more sanctions relief from the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. You know, just for a couple of weeks, they've had more sanctions relief from the Trump administration than it got from all of the nuclear concessions it made in the JCPOA. So in the Obama era JCPOA, with this agreement with Iran, where people like Trump were criticizing Iran for getting too much relief, they've got more relief from Trump in just a few days than they would have got in that entire time. US to allow Iran to get $14 billion in oil revenue. It's a huge financial concession to Iran by the US. First time the US is buying Iranian oil since 1996. And it's all happening in the middle of the war against, Iran. And yet, when we understand, and this is Frank Luntz, who is a conservative pollster, if I'm correct, the US wants Iran to make 6 commitments. And these are, as far as I understand it, this is Trump's team game planning for potential Iran peace talks. And I bloody knew this would happen. I knew this would happen, which is, oh, look, exactly what the JCPOA asked for. We're going to rip this agreement up with Iran. We're going to go war with them. We're going to nick their oil. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then we're going to demand exactly what we ripped up because we thought it was so bad. No missile program for 5 years, 0 uranium enrichment, decommissioning of nuclear reactors, arms control treaties with regional countries, no financing for regional proxies, strict outside observation protocols around the creation and use of centrifuges. Sounds very, very similar. This is the same deal Obama had in place. Now, as I like to do, we're kind of end up this video with a little bit on energy because I think it's pertinent. Well worth looking at this graph. So this is how much oil is displaced by electric vehicles not needing oil. Global battery electric vehicles oil displaced in megaliters per day. And look at China compared to the entire world. So the entire world of oil displaced global displaced oil, and then China, right? We can thank China for its massive EV rollout. 50% of all cars sold in China are electric vehicles. That many EVs means less pressure on oil products. We would be paying much more if it wasn't for mass EV adoption. This is such an important point. You need to understand that had electric cars not been such a big thing in China and not such a big thing, growing thing in the world, every single one of those cars would be a petrol car and would be demanding refined crude oil products. And the war in Iran, if it wasn't for electric vehicles, would have had phenomenal impact on the price of oil to a degree that I don't think we realize. So this person's saying we need to thank China, actually, to a large degree, for the impact not being nearly as severe as it should be on the price of oil and the access to oil. China would have been demanding that oil for their petrol vehicles, not for their electric vehicles. And there would be a massive fight for this megaliter, like 350 megaliters a day of fuel would have otherwise been demanded. Absolutely incredible. Now, it's hard to grasp the pace of solar and wind build out. It took 22 years this century to install the first 2 terawatts of solar and wind capacity. 22 years to get 2 terawatts of solar and wind. Then it took just 3 years to build the next 2 terawatts. So to go from 2.1 terawatts to 4.2 terawatts took 3 years, and to get to here took 22 years. That is, so when I keep talking about this, people need to understand the pace of rollout for renewables that will be having a massive impact on the energy market. Totals matter, short-term, long-term scaling, speed matters more. India's photovoltaic module manufacturing capacity tops 210 gigawatts. Now, India are getting on board with this, and they are building their own solar panels. And this is what I talked about when Obama said we need to be ahead of green technology. And then everyone was like, stop being too woke. And then China said, hold my beer. And now they are reaping the rewards. And India is saying, well, we can do that too. And the United States, Trump is saying he's going to bribe the wind turbine industry $1 billion not to have operational wind turbines working, new wind farms working. So massive kudos to India for rapidly building their own solar supply chain, doubling panel manufacturing in just 12 months. Honestly, if you're not with it, you are going to be left behind. Cuba's solar revolution, get a load of this. So there's a crisis in Cuba right now. They are not getting oil because it's sanctioned, but I guess they can get solar panels. Within a year, Cuba's solar power has been rising from under 6% to around 20%. In February, Havana reported 900 megawatts of solar power at midday peak time for the first time. Trump's oil embargo has made Cuba the country with the fastest growing solar energy sector worldwide. Fossil fuel dependence is a geopolitical weakness and a risk. Solar energy is the answer. Cuba shows how quickly this can happen when the pressure is high enough. Just fascinating, and there are loads of really cool tech discoveries going on with photovoltaics and stuff at the moment. Yeah, so anyway, I just thought that was worth looking at, and there's loads more on that kind of stuff. Some of the new tech I'm seeing coming out of China is phenomenal with regard to how they're using solar and in what different context. Right, okay, that's enough from me. I've had a whole bunch of American stuff to go through here, but we'll keep that for another day. We'll go through some more of your comments, and then I'll let you get on with the rest of the afternoon. Depending on where you are, actually, it might not be the afternoon. So we have Steve McGowan. I was wondering if you were going to speak on Czechia, because I mentioned Czechia earlier. Here in Czechia, there are still some old vatniks who reminisce about the communist days. They are dying off, though. I heard from Jiří Kraus, who was saying of the Czech election, the Czech rally the other day, that essentially, well, the video I did this morning talks talked to this huge rally that took place on Saturday, I think, where they were marching for or gathering to protest the government, the coalition government, and to stand for democracy. But he was saying that very much the kind of older generations are very, very sort of pro the government, and there is a generational split there. Okay, Martin Matter said the EU withdrawing from MasterCard and Visa and using their own system instead. That's a big thing that's happening. So the EU is developing a payment system to rival Visa and MasterCard because they don't want technological and economic and financial and military dependence on the United States. That will have way bigger consequences for the dollar than the India thing, in my opinion. That's a really good point, by the way. I hadn't thought of it in terms of, I thought of it in terms of a technological dependence thing, but actually it will move away from having to use dollar for transactions quite often. So that's interesting. Thank you for that comment. Okay. We have, you know they exist. A big salute to JP from 8 billion passengers. Thank you for that. You know they exist. I don't know who these 8 billion passengers are. The people on Earth. People. I went to the cinema last night with my boys and saw Project Hail Mary, and it was a lovely feel-good film. I really enjoyed it. I thought it had a lot of humanity to it. And I say that as a pointed word to describe what's going on in the film, considering you're talking about aliens and humans. Yeah. Anyway, Mikey from Cambridge, Cambridge, England. Reform and Farage are dropping in the polls. That they are, and that's to be expected. I think the question is, will they have a ceiling? And I think they should do, and that's the problem that Farage has in getting into power. That actually, I think there's a natural ceiling for Farage. At least that's a hope for the other parties. A surprise it's us, Lynn. Hey, I've wondered about you so often. Then you popped into a live chat recently, and I didn't get a chance to speak to you before the end of the chat. And I just want to hope that you're okay and everything. So thank you so much for your generosity in gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Hello in Arizona, where I presume you still are. Big love to you there, and hope all is well with you. Right, Rob, hey buddy. Rob Cook says Trump sundowning or sundown syndrome prevalent among people with some form of dementia is characterized by increased confusion and restlessness beginning in the late afternoon and early evening. Interesting. My dad falls asleep in the sort of early afternoon, and yeah, so that's what. And actually, Trump is falling asleep in a lot of meetings and all sorts of me. So yeah, I wonder if he does have dementia. You can bet your bottom dollar, and that's probably why he's got bruised hand. He's on every single drug they can throw at him to keep that dementia at bay. Thanks, Legend of the Multiverse. Thank you, Aussie T. I really appreciate your support. Thank you, Jesper Peterson, for your super sticker there. Really generous. You know they exist. Sodium is getting good for batteries. So the new sodium batteries are amazing. They can operate at very low minus temperatures and very high temperatures as well, 60 degrees down to minus 40 or whatever it is, and not largely affect their performance. They're safer. The new batteries are insane. Also, the really quick charging batteries, BYD, you've got like 5-minute charging for like 700 kilometers or something, whatever it is, some mental stuff. It's all game changing. These things you'll be thinking like in 10 years time, why do we bother whinging about going onto electric cars or whatever? They'll just be the norm, and they'll be obviously, a more sensible way of doing things. But it's going to be about rare earth metal processing, which is quite a polluting thing. It's still better for certainly in terms of carbon for the environment, electric cars by a considerable distance. But there are going to still be challenges, right? But yes, that's a really good point. And there's some really great videos online about the new sodium batteries. Okay, what else? Vigo Holmson, the USA will be left behind with archaic tech and energy reliance. I mean, that's what I worry about the US is like their kind of anti-woke positioning on stuff like energy is, and he keeps talking about that. Like Trump said earlier, it's about, he said about his issue with the UK was it's immigration and energy, and the idea in supporting Orban, he was talking about, well, it's about energy for us and immigration for you. So energy is a huge thing for him, but he's just trying to backpedal to go backwards. It's not about the environmentalism of it. It's about the economic practicalities and the economic prospect for not adopting tech that will be future-proofing the country. It's just, Trump is really naive. Like, if you let ideology get that much better of you, then you're going to make, I think, poor decisions, certainly economically. Julian Roster, the Slovenian elections were on Sunday, and it's neck and neck between the Liberals and the Populists. Denmark is tomorrow. I thought the Slovenian guy had won, though, since, I mean, it was Sunday, but yes, they are. It is this. What's worrying is that even though there are successes, the proportion of the votes these days that go to the populist far right is, I think, worryingly high. Denmark, it's interesting in Denmark. There's a lot of talk, though, that the ruling party there has done really, really well from Trump attacking Greenland, essentially. And Mette Frederiksen's party is now doing really well in the polls as a kickback against Trump, in the same way that Mark Carney and the Liberals in Canada did well, and Anthony Albanese in Australia did well on the back of the opposition getting too cozy with Trump and MAGA republicanism, really. Stephen Bendel, happy Nordic Day. Indeed, happy Nordic Day, Stephen. Thank you for your support, my good man. And Hoagie, good to hear from you, Hoagie. Thank you for your support, gifting 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you to all of you. You're wonderful people. Please go to atpgeo.com/donate. Help out with the campaign that we are on at the moment. And there you go. Lots of you talking about batteries, sodium batteries, and all sorts going on in the chat, which is all interesting. So yes, anyway, Golub won. He was a better option. Harlequino, our actor friend there. So good to have you on board, my friend. Right. Thank you, everyone, for your awesomeness. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon. And thank you to Benny Pie, who's been in the background looking at the questions and curating them. Thanks to the mods. And just remember, Slava Ukraini. And, here's to a bit of Doza. Here's to a bit of Doris there. She's a bit blurry. There you go. There you go. Look at that clarity there. Doris, looking good. Loving those rockets firing up. Yay. Anyway, toodle pips. atpgeo.com/donate. And I'll speak to you soon.